could say I've become a Ghanaian. Everyone there shows up late. So, but my name is Josh Heikkila. I serve as what's called a mission co-worker for the Presbyterian Church USA. So I work for the denomination, the Office of World Mission, and we're part of something that's called the Presbyterian Mission Agency. So all the work of the denomination offices falls under the mission agency. And in particular, I serve as what's called the regional liaison for West Africa. So I work to support the partnerships, I say the 3 Ps, the partnerships, programs, and projects that we do with partners in West Africa, church partners in West Africa. So I live in Ghana, where we work with the Presbyterian Church there, and we also work with the churches in Liberia, Niger, Togo, and Nigeria. This is a map of West Africa here. So I'm in Accra. Ghana is about a country of 32 million people, and it's about the size and shape of Oregon. If you flip Oregon on its side, it's about that big. It's mostly, the southern part of the country is mostly Christian, and there's a Muslim minority. So it's about 80% Christian, 15% Muslim. Togo is a little smaller, but it's about the same percentage Muslim Christian. Where we work here in Liberia is mostly Christian country, about 95% Christian, and it's maybe, Liberia might be about 5 million people now. Nigeria over here is huge population, about 250 million people. And it's about evenly split. If you draw a line in the middle, mostly Christian in the south, mostly Muslim in the north. They say in the next couple of decades, Nigeria is expected to overtake the US in terms of population. It's growing fast. And then we also work in Niger. Niger is about twice the size of Texas. It has about 25 million people, and it's overwhelmingly Muslim, about 98% Muslim, with a 1% Christian minority, and we work with the church there. The lines here are important because north of this line is mostly Sahara Desert, very few inhabitants, very sandy. The area between it is what they call the Sahel. It's an arid region, but there's a rainy season for about 3 months from June, July, August, where they grow crops there. And south of the dotted line is mostly tropical West Africa, very green. So it will look like this in Niger in the dry season. This is a field that's been plowed. It's been plowed for planting. They'll plant millet there. So in a couple months, it will look like a cornfield, if you can believe it. It goes from sandy to green in a couple weeks. But in Niger, most all the water is also in the ground. So there's very few rivers. Most everyone gets their water from wells like this, open wells like this. But if you go along the coast to Ghana, where I live, or the other countries along the coast, this is what the tropical forest will look like. So very, very big contrast. This is a national park. It has these rope bridges strung between trees. They're about 100 feet off the ground. You can go walk, but some people do it. They're crying as they go. If you don't like heights, you won't want to do it. In the northern part of Ghana, this is what a village might look like, houses in the village, where there's no electricity here, no water. So people live without electricity. They'll fetch their water from wells. These are houses that are made in the traditional style, mud brick. Every few years, they'll put a new layer of mud on it. And every few years also, they re-roof it with the grass roofs. This one's being re-roofed right now. And the fields will be out around the houses. But then when you get to the cities, most people live in concrete block houses like this, with water, with electricity. I live in one that's like this, but it's a little smaller, but it's also a 2-story building like that. One thing to keep in mind is that when I talk, we talk a lot about the poverty we're working with in the countries, but there's a growing middle class that's doing well. The countries where there's stability, they're doing well. So you'll find an upper middle class person may live in a house like this with a swimming pool. I don't have a swimming pool, but they're very proud of how they're growing and thriving. And they always want me to tell you about how beautiful and wonderful the countries are. So keep that in mind when I'm talking, as we show maybe some of the problems. One of the things to keep in mind, okay, so this maybe in a rural area, you may have a road like this. In the rainy season, these are the potholes. You have to navigate your way through so you don't get stuck. But in the cities, you'll find a business district like this with lots of traffic and hotels and restaurants. So again, it's a contrast from the rural to the urban areas. Ghana has been known in recent years, and Nigeria as well, for the thriving art scene. I always ask people, do you know what country has the largest film industry in the world? It's India. Do you know what number 2 is? Nigeria is number 2. The US is number 3. But there's so much in recent years, movies, music, fashion, literature coming out of West Africa. They're very proud of it as well. Ghana has an arts festival every August. It's been featured in Vogue magazine, and tourists are coming. So if you want to come sometime to Ghana, August is a good time to come and see the art scene. But just some pictures about the daily life there, the culture there that I want to show before talking a little bit about the work. So this is some of the background. Again, you're in the rural areas, it's pretty common for people to cook over firewood. So when you do that, a day or 2 a week may be spent walking out into the fields to collect firewood. And it falls oftentimes to the children in the household, especially the girls. So you see here, the girls have gone out to collect firewood. This is in Niger, where trees are few and far between. So they'll even sometimes collect the green branches and let them dry because it's tough to find firewood. There's ways, it's interesting, the church is looking at working with stoves so they can more efficiently cook with firewood, trying to teach people how to use stoves. This is a woman who's gone out to collect firewood in northern Ghana. But you always go out and collect with a friend, because oftentimes what you collect is too much to lift yourself. So you have a friend help you lift it on your head, and then you'll walk home with it. So it's pretty amazing the way they learn to walk. They say that when you walk with something on your head, it's like a model. You learn to walk very straight and efficiently. But in places also where water, this is a typical well. In Niger, you have to go about 100 feet down to get water. You'll see here, she's pulling it up with a rope, but they'll also use the cows, and a pulley system here to pull up. So you can see that it's that far away, and the bucket still hasn't gotten to the top. So that's pretty deep. Children also are in the family are the ones who fetch water. So they'll often go early in the morning around sunrise, then they'll go to school, maybe from about 7:30 to 2:30. And then again in the afternoon, maybe about 4, they'll go back to the well and collect more water for the family. Here's a young boy who's been sent out with a family cow. Do you think we do that in the US? Maybe on farms. There are children who still take out the cattle. But again, here, this is the same well as before. The girls now here are walking home. Sometimes they use the plastic jugs, about 5 gallons, the traditional clay pots, or the metal pan to walk home. And children have learned this from such a young age that normally they can walk with balancing the water. They don't need to use their hands to walk home. But it's an arduous task. I say sometimes in the US, when I'm in the US, I go to the grocery store, and I have a grocery store about 2 blocks from my house, and I walk home with a gallon of milk, and it starts feeling heavy after about a block. And that's a lot larger than a gallon of milk. Again, here, the girl was headed to the well, and she was going to bring home all 3 of them filled with water. I think it must weigh more than her. But in a lot of places, there's no families. The average income in the region may be about $100 or $200 a month, so a few $1,000s a year. But so it's not enough to afford an automobile. But a lot of families have motorcycles, so it's pretty common to see families moving around on a motorcycle. You see here, this mother had gone to pick up her 3 school-age children from school, and the baby's on her back here. So all 5 of them on the motorcycle home. It's pretty amazing sometimes the things you'll see getting around on car and motorbike. Just people are incredibly resourceful with the resources they have. This is a typical scene in a city. Sometimes the smaller towns outside the cities will have market days. So people will go out to sell their goods in like an open air market, like a farmer's market type stuff. And then they'll come back at the end of the day back home. So you'll see men and women riding on these larger trucks as they go in and out or out and back into the market. In some places in the rural areas as well, there'll be rivers with towns on both sides, but the closest bridge could be a couple miles or a couple hours downstream. So it's pretty common to see people getting across rivers with canoe. You know, it's amazing. Here you see the motorcycle crossing over by canoe. But there'll also be fishing that's going on in rivers like this. So people use them for work and for transportation. Regarding things that can be transported on a motorcycle, I saw this, and I'm always taking pictures of things that people are moving by vehicle and motorcycle. I always say that if I tried this, I would be dead. If I tried to balance a 20-foot step ladder as a passenger on a motorcycle, I wouldn't be able to do it. So it's pretty incredible. This one I got too. They said that this was a car that broke down in a village. So they went out with a tricycle motorcycle. It's the one with the 3 wheels, and they got some guys to put it on top, and they were bringing it back to town to repair. So again, pretty amazing. You know, one of the things that's fun about the region is that even with the difficulty in life and the struggles people have, there's a lot of humor and joy in it. You know, I don't know, sometimes we Americans, we have so much, but we're always complaining about problems. There they don't have as much, but there's a lot of joy in daily life. This is one too. The number of things that can be loaded on a vehicle as it goes traveling from town to town. And this is a pretty common scene too. If farmers want to send their animals to the market, they'll hire a vehicle and fill it up both on top, and you see they're in the back as well as the passengers. Along the coastline in the region, the rivers, fishing is still a pretty common profession, especially with the men. The men are fishermen. What they'll do is they'll go out overnight and fish overnight with nets. And they'll come back in the morning, and the women will meet them on the beach. The women will collect the fish, bring it to the market to sell. Some bring it to the places where they smoke it. A lot of fish is smoked to preserve it so it can last longer. But after the men have been out at night, they'll mend their nets. So when you go to the beach early in the morning, you'll see the fishermen mending their nets after a night in the sea. You know, and these are things that have been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. If you think of in the Bible, when Jesus called the first disciples, he was walking along the Lake Galilee, and the fishermen were mending their nets when he called them. And it's very colorful. You'll see the traditional boats are still some of those tall trees. They cut them down and they dig them out and then put on the sides to make the traditional boats. Nowadays, they'll put an outboard motor on it. So it's a combination of tradition and modernity here. In all the region, maybe like the US as well, the women are the backbone of the church. And this was a women's group that was gathering for Bible study. It's pretty common in the area. Women especially will put on the traditional dress for church events, and it's very colorful outfits. In the region there, it's what you do is you'll go to the shop and you'll buy fabric by the yard, and then you take it to your tailor who will sew it to you. So everyone has their own dress or shirts that are made from the tailor. When you ask someone who's your tailor, everyone has a tailor in West Africa that you go to make your clothes. In the region as well, there's a partnership between the government and churches for education. So although schools are run by churches, they're considered public schools. The government will pay salaries, teacher salaries, but the schools will be administered by the churches. And oftentimes in communities, as communities are growing, the church will be the first one to establish a school. And when a school is first established, it can often look like this. It's just, a makeshift structure with some tree branches and grass for shade, some desks. And the hope is always to put up a more permanent structure. This is the Presbyterian pastor here who was showing me the school. They were looking for help to put up a more permanent structure. And this is often something they want to build. This was a church that was built with help. There were some Presbyterian congregations in Dallas, Texas that gave money. They had two of them merged, and they sold one of the properties, and they gave some money to help build a school. And this is there's 6 classrooms here, and they expected it to have about 300 students once it opened, so about 50 kids per class. This is Ghana, here in Ghana. One thing as well, I mentioned the humor and the joy in the region. There's an outlook of faith with a lot of things. It's very common for people to name shops with religious names or meanings of faith. Sometimes they get to be humorous when they're put together. I think this is a woman who named her hair salon Trust Jesus, and it became Trust Jesus Hair Salon. I joke that if you're having a bad hair day, you have to trust Jesus for your hair. Here's another one: watch and pray hairdo. If it's bad, maybe you have to pray. Sometimes they're funny as well. I like when the bars, the drinking spots, as they call them, have religious names. This was the God's Miracle drinking spot. Yeah. Or here, Cana spot. You know what happened in Cana, right? Jesus turned water to wine. So it's a good name for a bar. And this is one near where I go to church. It's called the After Church Spot. So some people go to brunch after church. Others can stop by. This is an area. This is an area of the city where there's a market. You see the woman here with the metal pan on her head again. She is what in Ghana they call a head porter. Probably haven't heard that term before. But when you go to the market, there'll be no place really to park your car. So you show up with a taxi or a bus. You might hire a young girl like that to walk with you through the market. And as you buy things, she'll carry them and then take them back either to the taxi or the car or the bus for you. Often these are young girls who have dropped out of school to support the family. So there's a lot of need to help young women like this both stay in school and all the struggles around young people who have dropped out of school for financial reasons. This one I liked. I saw. Oh, it didn't go. Help me out here now. It is not changing. What's it doing? Not advancing? No. Let's try. Fair enough. Okay. And reconnecting to PCUSA. Sorry about that. Okay. Technology. That's a joke. I named my iPad FBI surveillance to play around with a friend. Your name. No, that's me. You're not intended to see that. What's okay? Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, no. Okay. You try that. It's okay. Okay. don't know. I don't know. Is there a way to plug right into the TV? Okay. Sure.
Keep that like that.
Okay. Yeah, the HDMI. Okay. I did that one time with a. Is it one? Yep, there we go. HDMI 1. Okay. Good.
Josh, why don't we switch? Why don't we move you over this?
Okay,
Will that be okay?
sure. So I like this sign. Sometimes they say we Presbyterians are the frozen chosen. This was Baptist refrigeration. If the Baptists are too cold, maybe we Presbyterians need to be heated up a little bit. So anyway, one of the things about West Africa that's important to know is that in the 1480s, even before Columbus sailed across the ocean, the Europeans were exploring the coast of West Africa and built some of these old castles. This one was built here by the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch built them, other countries. At first they were used for just general trading, but over time came to be used for the slave trade. So a lot of people will visit Ghana. When you enter here, if you go down below, you can see the prison, the dungeons that were used when people, the coastal people would go inland, maybe go to war with some of the neighboring ethnic groups, capture them, bring them to the coast, trade them with the Europeans who took them across the Atlantic into slavery. So it's a current reminder of the shameful and sinful past that was present there. And it's, nowadays a lot of people are coming and visiting these. One thing that's, it's a difficult history. But one of the things that I think is interesting, in addition to the exchange of people or the human trafficking of people, just the things that have gone back and forth across the Atlantic and different parts of the world that also happened through the slave trade and trade in general. When you look at American history, there's so much influence that has come from Africa. And in Africa, there's influences that have come from the Americas and from Europe and from Asia, all because of this trade in people and in goods. That, again, they often say in church in Ghana, God can make a way where there is no way. So maybe God has made a way forward with the shameful past. One of the things, I was in Savannah, Georgia a couple weeks ago, and I was showing some pictures, some of these videos of West Africa, where this is indigo dyeing in West Africa. And they were telling me in Savannah that there were indigo plantations along the coast there. And it was something that was brought with the slave trade, and rice as well. There were rice plantations along the coast of Georgia and South Carolina, and that was something that was brought with the slave trade. So again, this history. This is an example of indigo dyeing in West Africa. You'll see these pits here in northern Ghana, and they'll put the yarn inside, and they'll dye it for a few days, and then they'll dry it into the yarn, and they'll hang it in the sun to dry. In other parts of West Africa, in Nigeria, there's this indigo cloth dyeing. the tradition there. And the interesting thing is these ones have been in continuous operation since 1498. So it's more than 500 years of this indigo dyeing tradition. Just the long history of things. In Ghana, they will take the yarn. Once the yarn is dyed, they stretch it out, and they have a loom like this with the feet. They use their feet to weave the strips of cloth. And in Ghana, once you have the strips, then they're sewn together into big pieces of kente cloth, which historically was worn by chiefs, but now is being worn by everyone. Sometimes you'll see the pastors wearing stoles. Graduation, some people will wear it during graduation. So again, this is the cloth tradition in West Africa. One of the other things, you saw the women earlier wearing the very, very colorful cloth. That's a way of making cloth that's called batik, or a wax print. And what they'll have here, you'll see on the right, there's a vat of hot wax, and they'll stamp cloth and then dye it, melt off the wax, re-dye it. There's a whole process, and you'll make cloth like this that will be dried in the sun. One of the things that's interesting about this is, although it's become kind of the traditional West African dress, it's a tradition that was brought to West Africa from Indonesia. The Dutch brought it as part of that trade. So again, it's an example of just the way cultures have influenced each other through the trade in people and goods. Nowadays, again, the way things are interacting, there's a guy in my neighborhood who take old Converse sneakers and sew the kente cloth onto it. So if you want a pair of kente Converse All-Stars, you can come to Ghana and see them. Along the coast of West Africa too, there's a long history of what they call masquerade tradition. They'll dress up. I don't know the full tradition of it, but there's meaning behind it. But nowadays, when you see someone like this, they're usually asking you for money. They follow you around asking for money. I was in New Orleans as well once, showing some people pictures of the masquerade tradition, and they really were saying that the Mardi Gras tradition is so similar to what you see in West Africa, that again, it's influence back and forth. I'll pause this for a second. At the end, every year in Ghana, at the end of the year, they have these big processions, parades, with the young people come out in costume with masks on as well. And I think again, is a Mardi Gras tradition, comes from these in West Africa. So the boys were gathering, and then they were gonna march through town, like I have a parade through town. I come from Ohioans. My grandparents all grew up in Ohio, and my grandfather always liked bluegrass music when I was a child. So I've also come to enjoy bluegrass music. And when I got to West Africa, it was fascinating to me to hear music played with a local instrument, the gourd with strings. And they say the banjo, the banjo comes from this West African tradition. And when I heard some of this music, it just sounds so similar to maybe what you'd hear in Kentucky or West Virginia with some of the banjo music. Anyway, I'm just fascinated when I see the way the cultures have influenced each other. For me, it makes life there interesting. One of the things I'll show you here as well, like the way culture there has influenced us, the way European traditions have mixed with the culture in Africa. This is a traditional dance in Ghana. I say sometimes it looks like a chicken dance. But what we'll do is people will stand in a line and you dance to the other side and you throw it off to your friends who then have to dance back. So you'll see they're dancing towards us and then it was going to be our turn to dance back. But you see more and more the way traditional dances in West Africa have now been incorporated into Christian worship. Um, this is another dance in Ghana, a different ethnic group where they have a harvest dance, and they were dancing the harvest dance during the dedication of this new church building. They had built a new church building, and the young men came to do the harvest dance. You'll see sometimes they have a wooden stick. That's actually a hoe they use in farming, but they've taken off the metal piece because they say when they're dancing, it's dangerous to have the metal. You don't want to hit the person. Yeah, so these are Presbyterian congregations. I don't know, do you dance here in Flint? You know, they make kind of bangles from nowadays they're made from bottle caps, metal bottle caps. Some people have seen this and they say it looks like Native American dancing. I don't know. I mean, there's no relationship, but there is maybe the similarity the way the dress is. Okay. This is typical Presbyterian church choir. I don't know how they came to wear the graduation robes, but most choirs in West Africa wear graduation robes as part of church services. I think when you hear it, you'll be familiar with the hymn. It's a Western, it's a European hymn, but they have the drums, the African drums, the traditional instruments. At one point too, you'll see the woman here, she starts doing the traditional dance, the way they combine them together. Do you know the hymn? Yeah. You see here, they start doing the dance. And see if you can figure out what hymn this is. Oh, come on, you people. But it's probably in a style you've never heard played before. Kind of that mixture of the European and the African. This also, the brass bands have become really popular in the region, especially the church youth like the brass bands. You'll be familiar with this song as well. But one thing I like about this is the conductor at one point also starts doing the traditional dance. So it's a combination again. You know the song? Yeah. Was that? Yes, yeah. You see here, he starts So if you're the conductor, you can start dancing. And one last video before I get to the serious stuff, maybe. Churches in the region, they don't pass collection plates like we do here. They always have a basket or a bowl in the front, and you dance your offering forward. This is a large congregation, several hundred people, and the offering can sometimes take up to an hour as they dance and sing their offering forward. But one of the things that's interesting here is at one point you'll see the guy playing the trumpet. And another thing they do with the trumpet is kind of a call and response style of singing. So again, it's an interesting combination of the African tradition with the musical instrument. You see, the whole church is coming down for the offering, row by row. You'll hear it start going back and forth. Sometimes when you talk to people, they'll say that either the trumpet or the drum is singing. They'll tell you the words that the drum or the trumpet is singing as it's played. So it's an interesting tradition. In our work in the Presbyterian Church, the mission agency, we've been using Matthew 25 to help give us some focus and direction to the work. The passage where Jesus talks of giving water to the thirsty, food to the hungry, clothing, visiting those sick or in prison. This line here, truly, I tell you, just as you did to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. I ask people a question everywhere I go. When you hear people mention the least, when you hear Jesus mention the least of these, who comes to mind for you? Who are the least of these? Answer. Impoverished. Maybe homeless people, prisoners, refugees. There's people that come to mind. But let me ask, do you ever think that you could be one of the least of these? Yeah. Because sometimes we think that we're the ones in the position of helping others, but we don't often maybe think about how others are also, God has put others in our lives to help us. In recent years, whenever I've, I spend most of the time, 11 months of the year or more in Ghana, and come back to the US from time to time. I'm in the US now for about 3 months visiting churches. And usually when I get ready to travel out of Ghana, people there started telling me a couple years ago, be careful, they were saying, because the US isn't a safe country. There's a lot of shooting there. They said, come back to Ghana where it's safe. And it was interesting to me that they started perceiving themselves as a peaceful, safe place, and the US was not. So I think they can see us maybe as the least in certain situations. But one of the things with that verse, Matthew 25, that passage of the Bible, the three areas we focused our work on is church vitality, working with programs to strengthen the church, working with poverty, programs to address poverty, and also with programs in peacemaking and reconciliation. So just let me give you three examples of that. In the north of Ghana, again, this is a traditional houses in the dry season. When it's the rainy season there, this is what it might look like. And it's a rice field. They grow rice in the north of Ghana. It's rainy enough in those 3 months to grow rice, but September, the rains stop. October, it dries out, and it comes times for the harvest. So all the harvest of the rice is done by hand, still using the traditional tools. What I thought was interesting is this man told me that when they harvest, they leave some behind so the poor people can come and clean up after them. Again, it's a biblical practice. But one of the problems they were facing in this community is that they were still using the traditional means of processing the rice. They would pound it to get the husk to come off. And they would just take hours and hours and hours to do that. So often what they would do instead is just sell the rice. People will pass through town and buy unprocessed rice at a low price. And people would just sell to get any money they could. So they were asking if we could work with them on a project to help the community process the rice, because if they could do that, they will be able to sell it for a higher price. So it was a project. They had an old barn or an old shed that they renovated and they hooked up electricity to. And there were some churches in South Carolina that helped them buy two pieces of machinery, a rice miller. You run the rice through and it takes the husk off, and then a grinder. So this is the rice as it's going through the equipment here. The children in the family still help out with all of this process. This is once it goes through, it's the chaff there. These are the grinders. So corn could be put through and made into corn flour. There's still, once it goes through, this is rice, once it goes through the machinery, it still has to be, you still have to separate the grain from the chaff. What do they call it? Winnowing. So they still use the wind to help blow away the chaff there. But once they are able to do this, they can sell the rice for a much higher price. So it's been a way to lift families out of poverty. So I think those two machines, it was about $4,000 just for those two machines. So it wasn't that much money, but it's had a huge impact. What people will do is the women and the men, the farmers who will come will pay a small price for the service. The church is making money off of that. That helps the maintenance of the equipment, but it's also giving something back to the community. So it's been an interesting project to lift people out of poverty. One of the things as well that a lot of congregations in the U.S. are doing is helping with health services of the church. The churches run a lot of programs, clinics and small hospitals. And one of the main things they do is just basic care. So maternal and child health is an important service that the church clinics are providing. So this is one health clinic the church has set up in a market area where women do most of the selling in the market, and they bring their babies with them. They bring the small children. So the women there's a project here for the women to come once a month to have the child weighed, and they monitor the health to see if the child is healthy. They can refer them to another hospital if there's a problem. This is a project that's been taking those tricycle motorcycles and covering them and using them as ambulances. In the past, if, like, say a woman started giving birth in the house and had complications, they may have to walk her or put her on a motorcycle to get to the health clinic. So this is a project to help supply ambulances to rural health clinics. So that's an example of work with poverty. I want to skip over to Liberia, where we have connections. The church in Liberia traces its roots to the Presbyterian Church USA. Missionaries went over in the 1830s, 1833. So the church there is celebrating its 190th anniversary. This is a typical Presbyterian congregation in Liberia and the cities. They're very Western in a way, in some ways, because Liberia was founded by freed slaves who were encouraged to move to West Africa. It's a history a lot of people have been looking at because some of the freed slaves who settled in West Africa, southern slave owners gave people a choice. I will free you on the condition that you move to Africa. So there's some racism involved in the founding of Liberia. And sometimes it was even Presbyterian plantation owners in the South who freed their slaves. So the church is looking more and more its ties to this history. One of the complicated things about Liberia is when the freed slaves settled in West Africa, they also sometimes enslaved the local people. They recreated the system they knew. So when you're here this is the First Presbyterian Church of Monrovia, the pastor told me that the wealthy members of the congregation had their servants sit in the balcony. So it's the same thing you hear in the US of slave owners having their enslaved people in the balcony. This is a typical congregation, Presbyterian or Methodist, Baptist in Liberia. They look like these buildings, which to me looks like something you might see in the southern United States. This is a monument. The first freed slaves settled on the coast of West Africa in 1822. So it was just 200 years. Liberia celebrated the 200th anniversary of the settlement. And this is a plaque. In 1847, they declared independence as a country, but it took the U.S. another couple decades before Liberia was recognized as a country. It was during the Civil War that Lincoln finally recognized Liberia as an independent nation. This was a monument put up in 1922 for the 100th anniversary of that. The thing that I found interesting is I grew up in New Jersey, and one of the people who was instrumental in organizing the movement to free slaves and return them to Africa was Reverend Robert Finley. And he was the pastor of the town I grew up in, Basking Ridge, New Jersey. He was a pastor there in the 1820s. So my own town has a connection to Liberia, but I don't think anyone knows about that history. One other thing about Liberia as well is during World War II, Firestone Corporation bought up a lot of land in Liberia. I think they say about a third of the land of Liberia was bought up for rubber plantations. Some people have said that without Liberia, the U.S. wouldn't have been able to win World War II, Liberian rubber. These are some of the rubber plantations. It almost looks like maple syrup trees. I don't know if you've ever seen a rubber tree. They collect the sap. It looks like kind of a white ball, and the farmers who are working in the plantations will gather it, bring it, and trucks will come and they'll weigh it, and they'll get paid by how much they produce and weight. A lot of people were kicked off their land during that time, and this, people who are working on rubber plantations may still live in a house like this. So the condition of a lot of people is the condition of the houses they live in is, you can see, they're still struggling. And this is what, after 75 years of being kicked off the land that they once owned. This is a typical congregation in rural Liberia. Liberia, they're still struggling with a lot of that. Was the freed slaves that settled in the coast controlled the economic and the political power for the first 150 years of Liberia's history. There was a civil war that broke out in the 1980s and 90s, and it went through 2002. It was a very brutal war, a lot of people killed, and the country's still looking at ways of reconciliation to deal with its own complicated history. You can see in the capital Monrovia, there's still people in houses like this next to more middle class concrete buildings. You see the poverty and middle class side by side. But the Presbyterian church there, they've never been very large. At one point, they had about 75 congregations throughout the country, but more than half of them were destroyed during the war and still haven't been rebuilt. So from time to time, we get requests from them, can we help to rebuild some of their congregations because they want to get them off the ground again, the church growing again. I think they're down now to about 25 congregations that are in operation. So they want to get those 50 back off the ground. So if you have an interest in helping to re-roof a church in Liberia, I could help get you connected. But one of the things the church there is also doing is looking at education as a way of reconciliation in the country. So they're trying to encourage all their congregations to start a school. The government of Liberia, the Constitution guarantees education, but the government doesn't have the money to pay for it. So the churches are trying to get these schools off the ground. This is a school. Some churches in Alexandria, Virginia, have helped get this one off the ground, and are supporting it. And the First Presbyterian Church of Monrovia, the congregation you saw earlier, they had a back part of their land in the city that wasn't being used, so they put up this 4-story building, and they want to have it open by next year to be a school, primary, middle, and high school. And this is what one of the classrooms will look like. And those will be desks. Once they get some wood, they'll make them into desks. So the last thing, I know we're running over a little. I see you looking at your watch. To Niger. So, let me say that's an example of Liberia is a lot of peace and reconciliation work that we're trying to support there. And with education being part of that. Hop over to Niger. Again, it's an arid region. In Niger, there's lots of camels that are used to get around. So you have camel crossing from time to time. The main crop there is millet. It's too dry for corn. In a lot of other areas in West Africa, they grow corn, but millet's the main crop there. Women still process it all by hand, is the normal way, the traditional way, pounding it and then separating the grain from the chaff with the wind. The church has been doing a lot there with water, because most of these rural communities have difficulty with water. So the church sees water as a way that it wants to be involved with improving the lives of people in the country. And I have a colleague, Jim McGill, here. He's in Niger. He's an expert in water and sanitation. So they've been trying, the church there has been trying to, everywhere they have a congregation, dig a well to make water available to the community. And one thing, if you have a well there, you can do irrigated agriculture during the dry season. You can have a small garden like this. So they fenced off this area. They have the hoses here with a pinprick, so they can do gardening during the dry season, and that improves nutrition. They can sometimes sell it and make money. Again, they had just put down these the hoses, so nothing's been grown yet, but hopefully, I was there in January and saw it, but hopefully I'll see an updated picture of what the garden is like. The interesting thing now is that you saw earlier the girls and the young men, the boys who are pulling up water by hand. Solar panels have come down enough in price that they're using solar pumps. They'll put a pump in the ground. You can hook a solar panel and put it up on top of a traditional building like this, if you can believe it, the traditional brick building from the mud with the solar, the solar on top. They'll build the frame and put it on top. And then if you're able to put up these reservoirs, the plastic tanks, you pump it up there, and then gravity will just feed out the irrigated system. And again, you saw the way the young people were going to the well. The churches are making some of this water available to the community, especially the children, so they don't have to spend as much time pulling up water from the well. This here is the church building in that community. I think they said there's about 10 members there in a community of about 200. And some people would say that's a large church for Niger. Some communities you may only find 3 or 4 Christians, 5, sometimes 2 or 3 families who will attend the church, and most all of the community will be Muslim. it's sometimes I enjoy going to Niger sometimes because I'll meet people from time to time and they'll ask me, "Are you a Muslim?" And I'll say, "No, I'm a Christian." Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I've never met one before. I've only heard about you people." Or in a community like this, sometimes people will say, "Oh, no, I'd never want to be a Christian, but I admire the work you're doing in the community." So a lot of these projects create a lot of goodwill between the Muslim and Christian communities. But the church also sees it as a way of development, addressing the poverty in its midst. But it also, it's all those things together. It's strengthening the church. It's working against poverty. It's working with peace and reconciliation. In this community as well, it's the same tank, but from the different direction. There are also people who are bringing their animals to the water in that community. This is what you saw before, what's going to be the garden when it's up and running. But Jim is working to teach people how to run and to build and operate these systems. So this is basically a school they've got going, the church has got going to teach people how to do irrigated agriculture, how to run the wells with solar. One of the things they also have going is they're looking at ways of building wells using scrap metal, old bicycle parts, other pieces of metal. Sometimes when outside groups come in, they'll put in maybe a more technical system, but if it breaks, the community doesn't always have the knowledge or the expertise or the finances to repair something. But if we're able to have a well with scrap metal, they can keep it running. So he's got the solar, the irrigation, the pump, all these things. This church is running this center. One of the things they're also doing is working to teach people how to build, well, with sanitation, to have sanitation. Oftentimes in villages, there's the traditional way, they'll say using the bush. You just walk out around your house and use the fields. But sometimes that's not always the best thing for health and sanitation. So if you can build a small latrine, you can see improvements in health sometimes, but toilets are expensive. So they're looking at ways of making concrete toilets. You dig a hole, you put this on top, you'll surround it with a wall made from the woven stalks, the millet stalks, and it will look like something like this. One of the things they discovered as well, that in an arid climate, if you have a latrine like this, you can plant fruit trees next to it. The water will nourish the fruit trees. So you have organic mangoes. If you're willing to eat the organic mangoes, the benefit of this type of work. One last thing that church is doing is that in most communities, because there is no water, there is no electricity, schools didn't have toilet facilities. So often girls would drop out of school when they get to be the age where they start menstruating because there were not the right facilities. So they've been working with a project to help for their own schools, the church's schools, but also to teach community schools how to build toilet facilities, especially for girls, because that's one way to keep more girls in school. So it's a shower for girls, but it's really just a toilet facility that they have here that the church is working with. We're getting to the end, so it's coming up. One of the things, especially that I think is the important part of what we're doing, is it's just relationship. It's learning from one another, being engaged with one another. So a lot of congregations have partnerships. There's visits back and forth. We've been working especially with the seminaries to encourage exchange of seminary students. There's been some people who have come to Lake Huron Presbytery here over the years, but this is we have something called the Ghana Mission Network. There's the Niger Mission Network. We're getting the Liberia Network off the ground. Every once in a while, there are meetings that bring people together for fellowship, for learning, for exchange. Every so often, we have one in Ghana. So this is a couple years ago, we had a meeting in Ghana. We had the one a few weeks ago in Richmond, Virginia. So if there's ways your congregation is interested in getting involved with some of those partnerships, that would be great. I know the Presbytery here through Michael Ludwig. Do you know Michael has done a lot with Niger? All of what we do is supported from donations. Congregations support both the cost of keeping us employed, the projects we're working on. So thank you for ways that you've been supporting that. If you want to increase your donations or give more, or you have a $10,000 gift, I can help you know how to give it. There's a website for that. Yeah, but again, we're relying on congregations and people like you to support what we're doing. And I say, if you ever want to come to Ghana or the other countries in the region, this might be a typical meal that you get, fish head and all. So come for a visit someday, and it'd be great to see you over there. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, I have time for questions. I don't know if I've
Yeah,
kept
no,
you
let's
too long.
let's do the questions. Well, I know that some folks have kids upstairs and need to go get their kids, so we'll just do a soft break. And if you
Sure.
want to stick around and talk more with Josh, great opportunity. And for those of you in our congregation, one of the things that we've recently done to partner with churches in that region is we assisted in the building of a student hosting center.
Oh, okay, you did,
Yeah, in Terodi. Yep,
yeah. Okay.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
So they're putting up these facilities in all the hosting centers for in Niger.
Yeah.
And Jim, all of what you saw in Niger, they're trying to incorporate the water into the hosting centers.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's great.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, so soft break, take a couple minutes. If you want to stick around and talk more with Josh, great. If you don't mind, we'll just
No, yeah, perfect.